appreciate this opportunity. And we're not, unlike most folks here, we're not a BPM vendor. And so when we were talking about it, this is what I'm going to share with you is something that comes out of our labs team. So I know this is on a 15-second timer, so let me get started, so I'm going to get out of sync. So Princeton Blue was founded in 2006. We've been doing this for 9.5 years. Our focus has been to deliver business transformation through BPM and rules. And actually, we did a count just recently, and we have done over 300 projects in this domain across a variety of technologies. So what's relevant to us is how do you use BPM rules and a few other things, which are like that I'm going to get into, like cognitive and so on, to improve the user experience, to improve operational efficiency, and to externalize and automate business rules. And of course, everything you see at the bottom is now a part of it, right? Cloud and mobile, et cetera. So this is a solution that I'm here to talk to you about. And this was touched on in the panel discussion earlier today. Every process-aware app that we build today looks at internal systems for signals to make decisions on. And most of the data comes from a variety of touch points with the customer, whether it be call center, website, point of sale, et cetera. Actually, there's a study from IBM that says that 80% of the data is out in unstructured format, whether it's blogs, forums, websites, et cetera. This is actually based on a real story. So last year, I'm a frequent flyer on United. I don't know if anybody's here from United. I had a not so thrilling experience, and I happened to tweet about it. I got a feedback from them saying, please call our call center at 1-800, et cetera. Now, if they knew that I was 1K, if they knew where I had traveled, if they knew that I had already complained 3 times, and would that response have been a little different? Certainly from a customer perspective, I think it would have been appreciated if it was a little different rather than a canned response. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? How do you collect all this information that's out there, not just within your systems, but beyond that, and use that to understand the signals that is within that unstructured data, analyze it, and look for patterns that are meaningful to you depending on the use case that you're trying to go after. And so this graphic here kind of summarizes it, right? On the left, you see stuff that we've all been doing. We've been integrating with these systems and collecting this information. On the right is where we get to see how will this influence our decisions better, right? So credit card companies have always had a variety of algorithms to say, hey, this is suspicious activity because the amount is too large or the geography or the location is elsewhere. Here, what we're saying is imagine if you combine the transaction information with social media because you get the geolocation from both. And you can say, hey, it's not possible to travel 1,000 miles in an hour, therefore one of the two is suspicious, right? It's just an example of a use case that you couldn't pursue if you were doing that. I need a little bit more time on this slide, so after this automated stuff we're through this, I will actually talk to this right at the start of the demo. This is what it looks like today. There was an earlier version of this, what we started with 2 years ago. And as newer technologies have become available and affordable and accessible to us, we have evolved this R&D initiative over the last 2 years. You can tell that use cases here are endless, right? We've developed 3 use cases, but you could just, and I've spoken to customers in a variety of industries, everything from banking, retailers, insurance companies, telcos, healthcare providers. Everybody's got use cases that are relevant here. So I'm gonna show you issue escalation and brand ambassador as we go through the demo. So I made it through the Ignite part. So about 2 years ago, when we first started this solution came about because as we've been working with clients, we see that most organizations have some form of Lean Six Sigma going on for process improvement, BPM going on. They're not talking to each other. They're separate, the technology folks. And then there's a marketing team somewhere in the corner that's doing what I would call social listening. If you put it on the process modeling maturity curve, that's probably 1. right? You're listening. That's what United did. They heard my tweet and they responded. We'd like to get them past the social listening part to the point where you're taking actionable custom insight, right? You get that insight that you can actually make a decision on and improve the customer experience, improve retention, and so on. So back then, we used a lot of open source capabilities that were out there. We built some APIs to the various social media capability. We used some open source sentiment engines. We used some complex event processing capability in open source as well. And we used IBM's rule engine, operational decision manager. And over the years, a year later, Watson became available as a service and accessible. Like that's a lot of cognitive compute power that's now available to us that wasn't. Few other services came out on the Bluemix cloud offering, and the new version of the rules engine came out, which combined complex event processing and rules into one. And so combining all of these technologies, this is the second generation of this capability. So here's one of the use cases that I'll show you, right? Now I know, because I've been mining social media for certain individuals, I know what their social influence status is. Based on that, I can see what else has occurred. So if I know that this customer had opened a service request, and that request was then followed by some negative or angry tweeting or other activities, and all happened within a certain amount of time that's relevant to me, I may want to do an escalation of that process, right? Which in the traditional world would have been a very simple thing, right? You wouldn't have this ability to combine all this. Similarly, the other way around, you got a brand ambassador. You got somebody out there that's saying a lot of good stuff about you, and has done it frequently enough that you care about it, right? So these are the two use cases which I'll show you in a second. But really, this is not just about social media, right? There is unstructured data even within your own organization, right? Every company has intranets that is full of information. There's public records, there's news sites, there's blogs, forums, anything that's relevant. I mean, we're talking to a healthcare provider, and the use cases we're talking about have nothing to do with social media, because they're in a B2B business model, not in a B2C, right? I just want to show you that, in terms of what's available right now from a cognitive perspective, I mean, we just use one of the services, and I think every day more and more services are being made available. And this is the capability that was, beyond reach for most of us, even as partners or as customers, because, Watson was Watson, right? And this is now how we can represent rules. So I can actually describe, using this language, I can actually combine events and rules into one, which is, I think, a pretty powerful statement. So I can say if the sentiment was negative and the anger score was more than this, and it hasn't happened before in the last 7 days, and it was preceded by this or followed by that, then I care about it, right? So with that, John is our social influencer in this example. So John's been tweeting, and you can see that he's got some issues going on with the bank, right? These tweets go back like last 9 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. So he's not happy apparently, right? So what's happened as a result, and I asked my team when I landed here yesterday, I asked my team to start sending out tweets, right? So you can, that's what they've been doing. They've been sending out some tweets about this guy. And here is what the dashboard looks like that's now listening to all these signals and picking them up. It turns out that John actually used to be a brand ambassador for us. And he was, because of all the good things that he was saying, and the tone has gone quite negative. So this dashboard actually is listening to all this activity that's coming out of all this unstructured data that's been coming in, signals that have been picked up from that, and all that is then fed into the dashboard. Once this actually gets out to be implemented, the next thing you'd want to do is you'd want to actually use BPM for actioning it, right? Because you're going to pick up 30, 40, 50 signals a day. You're not going to manually action them, right? You're going to have a structured process that makes sure that there's some follow-up. It gets routed to the right people and so on. But in this case, we can see this is how it's... So this is now what we see about John, right? We can see that in addition to the traditional information we have about him, you can see the demographics and stuff. But by looking at what he's been doing in the unstructured data world, we actually have an idea of what his presence is, what his following is. He's got 3 profiles. He's got pretty high reach count. He's got influence because whenever he puts something out there, people like it. And his volume is fairly high. So this is what we consider to be an influencer, right? And I know you're probably wondering, well, how do you know so much about this guy? Because that's a question we get all the time. You actually ask them to provide it. You'll be amazed how many people will give it to you as part of their profile, as long as you provide a value-add service on that channel, right? We never gave out our cell phone numbers or email addresses if you go back a few years. But we do now because I want to know when my flight's delayed, so I'm happy for them to have my cell phone number. But there are other ways to get this information as well through APIs and emails and so on. But the most reliable way is to just ask them to provide it to you, and in most cases they do. We also have things that, based on whatever he's liked, we can see what he's interested. So if we're going to reward him with some form of a loyalty program, we're actually going to we can actually see what he's interested in, so that loyalty program can be tied to that, right? A discount at an auto parts store or whatever, because he likes cars, right? So now you can see here that the tweets and everything else that we did earlier on, and you can see this was from pretty early this morning, the 14 hours ago. That same stuff has come through here. So it's been categorized as a sentiment is red, that means it's negative. The mood is kind of sad face. So that's why this got picked up. An escalation rule got triggered because of these 2 indicators here, right? You've got the sentiment coming in, and you've got the mood coming in. And if I go and see the source, you can see that this was the tweet that actually triggered it. There were many, because remember the use case calls for multiple tweeting. So just because you tweet once, it doesn't pick it up. Our rule says you must tweet 3 times over a certain period of time in order for it to be triggered, right? Because we're trying to eliminate some false positives, right? So, you get a history of this individual in terms of, what the sentiment and what the tone of what's happening in the social world. And that's now determining, how I escalate issues, how I resolve them. So in the case of United Airlines, if there was this contextual information available to them in terms of how many times I've tweeted, in terms of whether I am a social influencer or not, they obviously know about my travel patterns because they have all that information. But if they had the rest of the information, maybe the response would have been different, right? And so in terms of who is this relevant to, the specific use case that I shared with you is relevant to organizations that are dealing with consumers directly, and particularly the demographic that is, the millennial types or in that age group that are more active in these social platforms. But having said that, the reason why I look at it as beyond just social media is I can use that same service to get sentiment from any any site where I have natural language, right? So I can pick up the natural language and I can analyze it to understand what's being said, and how it's, how it's perceived, how the sentiment and tone are perceived to be. So based on that, I can make decisions. So in talking to a healthcare provider, they said, yes, while we don't sell our products, and their products are plans, and they sell them to the insurance companies and to the employers, but when you go and use that card at a doctor's or a drugstore, if it doesn't go through, the brand that first comes to your mind is the insurance company and the plan provider, right? So they believe that while they're in a B2B model, their customers' input is just as important to them, right? In talking to retail banks, very similar feedback. Retailers, of course, that are selling apparel and so on, very, very interested in this type of a capability. But we've even found interest with telcos, so your ISPs, right? How many, you go to YouTube and look up Comcast service issues and you'll see how much stuff comes up. So I think at the end of the day, yes, it's more applicable in a B2C, but there's definitely some use cases for B2B when you go after health records, you go after certain blogs, news, media sites, and so on.